Hi everybody, and welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and I am super excited about the second show of today because this is my favorite subject. We're going to talk about ancient Egypt, lost technology, ancient technology. I could talk Egypt all day long, and we have a super interesting guy to talk about Egypt with, Mr. Stephen Myers. He is an author, lecturer, and independent researcher. Stephen Myers has studied the Great Pyramid for over 20 years, a veteran of this research, and he did it to understand how the ancient world was built and why it was built. His research including traveling to Egypt personally and conducting his extensive research on the Giza Plateau. Stephen Myers has written numerous magazine articles and given many lectures on the subject of the Great Pyramid. He's compiled his research into two books which provide a comprehensive and detailed explanation of how the Great Pyramid was built and why. He's also founded a non-profit foundation that's dedicated in understanding how the Great Pyramid was built. The mission of that foundation is to redevelop these ancient but advanced technologies to help our own modern world, which is, as he says, troubled. Of course, Stephen's two books are The Great Pyramid Prosperity Machine, Why the Great Pyramid was Built, and Lost Technologies of the Great Pyramid, How the Great Pyramid was Built. What two fascinating books, and what wonderful, if you could call it a sequel to, in terms of the why and the how. So without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Hi Steve, you're very welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's great to have you here, Steve. And wow, my favorite subject, ancient Egypt. What is it that is so alluring to researchers to go to ancient Egypt to figure this stuff out? Is it the massive engineering scale for you, the mystery? What is it for you, Steve?
Well, I've always enjoyed history, but I like technology, technical aspects of history, how people interfaced with the world. That is technology. We use computers, hammers, cars, and everything else. And we have our electrical grid, and all of this is technology, how we interface with the world. And it's interesting to me how ancient people, especially in ancient Egypt, how they interfaced with the world and what they needed to do, and what was important to them, obviously, was to build this massive structure, the Great Pyramid. And why they did that and how they did that is the focus of my research.
You know, for the Great Pyramid, this thing for me, having been there, and it's only when you really stand there and you see the size of it compared to the puny human, no matter what height you are, 4 or 5 or 6 feet tall, this puny human standing in front of it trying to look at this monstrosity of a massive structure, you realize that this thing is a beacon on the horizon. It is a beacon of, look at this structure, look at this engineering, mathematical aligned structure. It's incredible. This is an incredible achievement that is largely unrecognized for what it is, Steve.
Well, it's certainly a mystery, much of the Great Pyramid. I too was there at the Great Pyramid, and I was struck not just by the size of the structure, but by the size of the components.
Mm-hmm.
The individual components are just literally out of scale for people to actually move using their back muscles. And Egyptology tells a story about the Great Pyramid, about a great big ramp that must have been bigger than the pyramid itself, mm-hmm. and how people with strong back muscles were drug these stones and everything. All of that hasn't really been demonstrated, or how the stones were cut with extreme precision, the way Egyptologists say. So it's just a mystery about the Great Pyramid.
Sure. Steve, you've been at this a long time now, and you've took on two beautiful questions, the why and the how. A lot of people don't do that, Steve, and I think that's a unique selling point for yourself as an author and researcher, in that you take on the why and the how together, and most people just either brush it off and don't want to touch it, or they'll focus on one aspect. But to take on the why and the how is not only two very big questions, but a task that's almost insurmountable, but you have provided a wealth of information. I guess tell us about the first time you've gone to Egypt, why you got into this in the first place, and what was your approach to figuring things out, and what was the first question you tried to figure out?
Well, I appreciate what you said about the how and the why. A lot of people don't address that. A lot of people consider the Great Pyramid as a pre-existing artifact to be understood, but I started with a clean slate, with no preconceptions or anything, and tried to understand how this Great Pyramid was constructed and what monumental purpose could have been as large enough to justify this structure. So I did a lot of research. I researched what Egyptologists say, and all of that, a lot of it doesn't make sense. It can't be demonstrated what they say. They just tell stories. So I examined the evidence itself, and there's a lot of evidence to indicate that the Great Pyramid was built by transporting the stones on barges using water locks, like the Panama Canal or the Erie Canal here in the United States. Sure. And these water locks allowed stones on barges to move all the way up to the building site.
Has that ever been proved for the stones that are, the small stones, but the stones that would have come from Aswan, are they not the biggest ones? They're the 500 ton, well, up as far as 500 tons, I think. But most of them are about 100 tons. Has that ever been proved in practice for the migration along the Nile?
All researchers agree that the heaviest stones were moved on barges because the quarries are so far away, like 400 miles away. 400 miles. So we just extend that idea and say that they were moved up water locks all the way to the building site. Egyptology, the science of Egyptology, has never moved anything the size of the largest stones, even 1 inch. They've never done that, which is a telling piece of evidence in and of itself. It's just like people that are cow jump over the moonologists. People that talk about cows jumping over the moon, well, it's never been demonstrated. So the point is, yes, on a technical level, barges can carry the weight of the heaviest stones of the Great Pyramid. In fact, the Erie Canal was a ditch 4.5 feet deep, but the payload of the barges was 70 tons, which is actually the weight of the largest stones in the Great Pyramid. So it's very possible. In fact, it's using water locks is the system of choice in the 21st century. It's 21st century technology. The Erie Canal is being enlarged using another set of larger water locks. So the best engineers in the world in the 21st century use water locks to move our heaviest objects. And I think when the Great Pyramid was built, their best engineers of the world used water locks to move their heaviest objects.
I'm just going to refer people to your website at this time, thepump.org. Why do you call it thepump.org? That's a good point to bring in this, Stephen.
Well, we call it thepump.org because we think that the Great Pyramid was built not as a marker for a grave. It wasn't built to house a dead pharaoh's body, but the Great Pyramid was built as infrastructure. It was built as an investment. It was built as a machine that paid back dividends to those who built the Great Pyramid. The pyramid wasn't built at a high cost, but it was a wise investment. And the reason why it was all of those things was that the Great Pyramid was a machine that functioned as a powerful and efficient water pump.
This is, for me, Steve, something very, very telling. And to not even draw on the actual function, but to draw on the payload. You don't, as an engineer, put any effort into something unless you get a payload back. In other words, all our biggest infrastructures or bridges or whatever, power plants, we put a lot of time and energy and resources into building these massive infrastructures today. But we get something back for that. There's some sort of use or sophisticated payload back as a result of that.
Yes.
So that's what we're saying. This Great Pyramid is they had a very, very technical reason for doing this.
Yes, that's why it's there. It isn't just something for some burial cult, or it's not a religious structure, is my contention. It has nothing to do with anything pointing to any stars or anything. It is a technical machine, and that is the purpose of much of the precision of the Great Pyramid. The casing stones that were on the outside were cut with extreme precision, but also cemented together watertight. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of that is through construction, they used various ponds and allowed the water to, the water allowed the barges to go right up into the Great Pyramid. We have a video series showing the process of how the Great Pyramid was assembled level by level. And, many of the chambers are cemented together that are both air and watertight, and all of these chambers weren't for golden treasure or anything like that, but they were part of a functioning machine. Mm-hmm. That's why there's no writing inside the Great Pyramid. It had nothing to do with writing. There's no writing inside the engine of your car, because the machine is a functioning. The pyramid was a functioning machine, and it pumped water, which served for irrigation, powered heavy machinery, used in scientific experimentation, and many other purposes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I've been there on the Giza Plateau myself, Steve, and I've seen the cement and these watertight joints with my own eyes. I believe the cement is so strong that it's stronger than the stone it's cementing together. In other words, if you were to try and break the stone apart, the joint would stay intact and the stone would break around it.
That is correct. The bonding agent, whatever it was stronger than the stone itself, and that was necessary for technical purposes. And it is also a lost technology of the Great Pyramid that was not plaster of Paris or anything like that. And Egyptology, the entire science of Egyptology, has never recreated even 1 ounce of that mortar. Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting?
Wow, yeah. There's definitely some fancy chemistry going on. I'm guessing you're not favorited by the Egyptologists, Steve.
Certainly, no. They have a story to tell, but they don't substantiate it using the scientific method. They don't, they've never made a casing stone, the way they say it was done. They say that they're experts. They say they know how it was done, but they've never made one. And in fact, I think my understanding is that it is actually impossible to make a casing stone with the extreme precision in the same manner that Egyptologists say. Mm-hmm. That it was done. I don't know how they can get away with that in this day and age. It's bizarre. And then there's other things. The bonding agent, they don't do that. They don't move stones at all. They've never moved a stone around the corner of a spiral ramp.
Wow.
Isn't that interesting?
Isn't it?
And here it is, the 21st century, and we have a science that refuses to engage in the scientific method. It's an odd situation that we're in.
It's a very peculiar situation, Steve, and therein is a very key thing you said, that they don't substantiate their claims. They make a lot of claims because they have to. They're telling a story that doesn't check out, and then they can't substantiate it, but they just say it anyway. They say whatever they need to say to dispel their own shortcomings.
That is true, and they declare edicts, and then we're expected to believe it. No, seriously, it's strange. Sciences usually advance, through the years, and Egyptology is kind of stagnated, if you will. And sciences, believe it or not, they come and they go. There was another science that was taught in universities about the correlation between the bumps on people's heads and psychological traits. That science was phrenology. and it was taught up until the mid 19th century or early 19th century. But that science could not withstand the rigors of the scientific method, and it went away. So Egyptology is, I think, a science in crisis, and it's going to either have to change its ways, or it will be less and less people believe what they say every day. I don't know anyone who is past the 5th grade that believes the precision stone cutting was accomplished using hand tools. Mm-hmm. So it's odd.
And I have to spend the time on this, Steve, because no matter who you are addressing the Great Pyramid structure machine in this manner, what we're talking about, it has to go through this misinformed opinion of Egyptologists for the posterity of what we're talking about for the generations that are going to ensue, because this stuff is now cutting edge research and cutting edge science. Looking at this, the science has now caught up with the Egyptologists, but it's still necessary to talk about the shortcomings of Egyptology, because these guys are still in the running. They have the stranglehold on this, and they just need to be talked about in this way, and not to be put down or disparaged, but to just say, look, you're not substantiating your claims, and it's not scientific. And I think that's a very good positive thing to do, without getting bogged down in the clashes. I know you'll probably get clashes anyway, but to not get bogged down in them.
That's true. I appreciate that. I believe that Egyptology is the largest hurdle to understanding ancient Egypt. Mm-hmm. And it'll take generations of research by alternative researchers to overcome the misconceptions that are perpetuated by Egyptology. There was another thing that happened, since you want to talk about it. There was a skull in England that was found in Piltdown, Piltdown skull. The world experts instantly agreed that it was a example of the missing link. But it took over 40 years for the experts to realize that there are file marks on the Piltdown skull. And it's going to take about 40 years for all the Egyptologists to die off, and a new generation of Egyptologists that say, no, that precision cut stonework can't be done by hand. And no, you really can't effectively drag stones up a ramp. So it's a process that's going to take generations to really get at the truth. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah, and I think you're actually pretty accurate with that. When you say generations, I really do believe it's going to be generations. I can be all the well-wishing and all the hope in the world, but I do think it's going to be a few generations before that paradigm really evolves into something tangible, because the paradigm has been there for 20 years now, this paradigm change. But I still think it needs to keep going. It's got a long road ahead of it.
Another example is that Stonehenge. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, if just 50 years ago, oh yeah, they built that for human sacrifice. Well, other researchers came along and said, no, well, there's some, it might be like a calendar to help with agriculture, for the planting, and for some other purposes, and for determining when eclipses would occur. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty high technology. It's not just a tomb, or it's not just religious or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's taken about 40 years, and that's the consensus now among the general population, that it was a very fascinating celestial calendar that served a real purpose. So hopefully, the same type of thing will happen with the Great Pyramid. And I think that just like we build giant hydroelectric dams and nuclear power plants, the ancient people of the Valley of the Nile built their large infrastructure to transform the desert into a garden, and to transform poverty into prosperity. And they wanted to make the world a better place. And they did, with this high technology from very ancient times.
Mm-hmm. Steve, you are talking to an engineer today, but for the listeners out there, and perhaps in a layman's language as best you can, maybe tell us about the pump theory and some of the details of that.
Okay. We think that the Great Pyramid had water at it, similar to what Herodotus said. He described the Great Pyramid as having an artificial duct connected to it. He also described the Great Pyramid as being like an island surrounded by water. And there was a enclosure wall around the Great Pyramid that existed up until the 18th century. And we think that impounded water. Well, anyway, that water went into the descending passage down into the subterranean chamber about 100 feet below the base of the Great Pyramid, and using the force of gravity. And we also think that the nature of the subterranean chamber's design used a vortex type of an energy similar to what Victor Schauberger talks about, that the water was pumped up into the Grand Gallery and then ultimately through the Queen and King's chambers and operating similar to a hydraulic ram water pump, but much differently, that it ultimately exited up through the King's chamber vents. And then we believe that gave the water pump the most head, if you will, the highest amount of water level. And then from there, our contention is that there were similar vents that went down the casing stones, inside the casing stones, and then out. Water was delivered to where it was used. And this water could have been used to make compressed air, static electricity,
power tools,
power tools, certainly irrigation, and generate electricity, and a whole host of other examples. But we think that this efficient, this whole process is described in great detail in my books for people to get more information. But we think that this ancient technology is very efficient and will give us in the 21st century, if we redevelop this technology, an alternative to using hydroelectricity or nuclear power or other forms of energy to supply energy for us in our modern times.
Of course, you spoke about having that head, that height of the water inside the pyramid. That's what really gives any type of pump system its power. It's power driving. That height, the higher up the water is, the more gravity, the more push that will pump out the pressure and the water. It could have been an incredibly powerful machine then, Stephen, this.
Yes, we think that it was incredibly powerful and served the people well, and it was worth the effort to produce. So, and we think that redeveloping this ancient technology for us would be just as advantageous. A clean, powerful, energy-efficient water pumping system that could be scaled down. Don't have to have big stone pyramids in your backyard, but you just need the passages and chambers, if you will, made out of PVC pipe and polypropylene containers, and make it so that people can make enough electricity with this pumped water to supply their needs. So, built on a community level, if you will, or local craftsmen, that type of thing. And that's why we started a nonprofit foundation called the Pharaoh's Pump Foundation to redevelop this ancient technology.
Well, it's wonderful talking to you, Steve, and it's great to hear somebody with a sound, logical, rational outlook on all this. There's a lot of people, they go head to head with the clashes, but you seem like a very, very rational guy that just wants to get to business, to look at this stuff for understanding and to seek the truth.
Well, I appreciate those kind words. A lot of people think that I'm a kook, but the interest is growing in this alternative idea, both about how brilliant the builders of the Great Pyramid were. They weren't knuckle draggers, dragging stones. that, for 20 years, but they were brilliant both in their efficiency of the construction of the Great Pyramid, but also in their vision for transforming their civilization into paradise, if you will. Mm-hmm. And they provided prosperity. The people had a full belly, and also their children were going to eat, and they had leisure because the infrastructure did the work. Just like in our civilization, our infrastructure does the work. We have light bulbs, we have lawnmowers and everything. Well, it's a whole different view of ancient Egypt than provided by Egyptologists. So it's an exciting direction of research to actually understand the Great Pyramid as an ancient but very highly technical skyscraper that was built with a very technical purpose to serve those that built it.
I have no doubt that the ancient Egyptians were a race of Da Vinci's, Teslas, and Einsteins. I have no doubt these guys were not just primitive, often referred to as being primitive, but not just that. These guys were so advanced in everything they did. They had a philosophy second to none. They had a technology second to none, and I think they worked in harmony with nature. And I think that's the key thing to point out. That it was a renewable resource, Stephen.
Yes, it was. And we use oil to be able to, we're in an age of oil, if you will, and the geopolitical issues that are involved with oil and all of that. And it's just terrible what we've gotten ourselves into on our energy systems. And there's alternatives. We've all watched the YouTube videos with some very, very unusual things that people are making in their garages and that type of thing. But then we all have to go down and pay tribute or buy gasoline from the terrorists, is what I say. We're funding the terrorists when we drive around. It's just an awful world. But the people I've talked to feel that we've got a revolution ahead of us, and in ideas, in understanding, in technology, and in a rebirth. Things cannot continue the way they are now. We're in a civilization that is unsustainable, in terms of pollution, in terms of debt, in terms of a lot of things. And there's a revolution brewing where things are going to change, and I think for the better, in many ways. And one of the foundational changes will be our energy systems. And if we can get in touch with the ancient energy systems associated with the Great Pyramid, then I think that'll make our civilization a freer, a cleaner, and a safer place to live.
Mm-hmm. Of course, the biggest thing people are, even in a layman's sense or in an engineering sense, the biggest thing that people are going to think about is the pump theory. How did they get the water up to the highest part of the Great Pyramid? Was there an absorption method, or was there a catalyst for getting that up there, like a natural catalyst?
We think that in the Grand Gallery, mm-hmm. there were plates that were used for electrolysis, and that separated oxygen and hydrogen from the water. And that oxygen and hydrogen is combustible. And that is combusted, ignited in the enclosed chamber of the Grand Gallery. And that creates initially a pressure, and that pressure is exhausted out through Davidson's passage above the king's chamber, and then a valve would close, a check valve, but ultimately it would create a vacuum. That vacuum would draw water up into the Grand Gallery. And it's very similar to the Humphrey pump in Australia. They have a huge irrigation pump that uses combustion to create a vacuum. And that is an example of a very similar technology used in modern times. Well, this vacuum draws up a huge amount of water in the Grand Gallery, like 200 tons, if you will, of water. It lifts it up, and then that acts like a water piston. It's allowed to move back down, and it compresses air in the upper part of the queen's chamber, and that compressed air pushes water up. It's actually kind of involved. It's almost like trying to describe a 4-cycle gasoline engine over the air. But we do have the well-illustrated book that shows this process, and we're working on making a DVD documentary with computer-generated animations to help people visualize this fascinating process. You know, the Great Pyramid doesn't look like a tomb. It has all these passages, chambers. There were sliding stones in slots, that type of thing. And I asked people, how do long open passages with sliding stones keep robbers from getting the pharaoh's mummy? There's no answer.
True.
There's no answer. But these long open passages are like, in effect, pipes, and the sliding stones are, in effect, valves, if you will. And they makes a much more, I think, appropriate explanation for the same direct physical evidence that we all have. So I hope people read my books about this process. We do have a DVD documentary about how the Great Pyramid was assembled, and that can be purchased commercially, if you will. But you can also watch the videos from our YouTube channel, which they can get to from our website. So there's a lot of information we have provided from our foundation's website, as well as YouTube videos, and also doing wonderful interviews like I'm doing now.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. And of course, you can get that all at thepump.org. And tell me a little bit about the foundation. I'm guessing, Stephen, you must get a lot of engineers flocking to look at this theory.
Well, there is a lot of interest by essentially technical people. Of course, Egyptologists don't like any of it. You know, they're into the pharaoh war, or they're into golden treasure, or taking mummies out of graves. They're into all of that, so they can put all this stuff in museums and have paying customers come and look at it. But technical people, yes, that want to really know how stones were moved and how they were set in place and all of that. But we have board of directors, we have advisors, pro bono legal counsel, and a number of other things going on. We're working on another trip back to Egypt.
Oh, wow.
If people want to become involved, all donations are tax deductible. We're using crowdfunding to acquire a 3D printer for our facility. We have a facility that we do experimentation and that type of thing. And we are about halfway through funding for a nonprofit, our nonprofit foundation, to get this 3D printer. So that is a thing that we're doing. We offer our books from our website that are both in softcover and also Kindle edition. So, like I say, there's a lot going on. That type of thing. We're doing some lectures, interviews, and experimentation at our facility. So I hope people, if they have a question, they can come by the website and send us an email, let us know what their question is, or if they want to become involved.
Wow, very prolific in the scope and spectrum of what you're doing, Stephen. Not just some books, DVDs, but a hands-on approach as well. And I think that's what sets you apart from a lot of other researchers, that this is something that people can get involved in and be a part of. Very interesting to see what's going to happen on the next expedition to Egypt, for sure. Keep you updated on that. Tell me about, okay, we talked on the why, the pump theory. Tell us about the how the Great Pyramid was built. Let's focus on that for a little bit, Steve.
Okay. Yeah. There were water locks from the Nile River all the way up to the building site. But imagine the first stones that were set in place were the casing stones for the first level of the Great Pyramid, if you will. And that would make a square enclosure. And then imagine that that enclosure was filled with water. And these stones on barges were able to go from the Nile River all the way up to the building site, and then there was a water lock built into the casing stones, and it allowed the stone on the barge to enter this pond, if you will. Mm-hmm. And the interior stones for that level were moved from the barge and set right down into the pond. When that pond was full of stones, the first level of the Great Pyramid was completed. And that process would continue. Another water lock would be set on the second level of the Great Pyramid in the casing stones, and that enclosure would be filled with water, a higher level, if you will, and then stones on barges would be brought all the way up to that pond, and the interior stones would be set right into the pond, and the process would continue level by level as the Great Pyramid rose to the sky.
Wonderful, Steve. Steve, this is a very, very thought-provoking task you have took on. You seem to be very, very astute in how you look at this. This must be modelled in your mind, Steve, and a very, very deep, profound way of looking at this before you just release this. This is not something you do overnight. This has been thought out for a long time, Steve.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my interest started out as just an interest. I like I say, historical technology, like old guns, old one-lunger engines, the old farm engines and farm tractors and other things like that. But if you like history and technology, your focus will ultimately become focused on the Great Pyramid. And it started out as an interest. It became an obsession, and now it's a life quest, if you will, with the nonprofit foundation and all that we're doing. You know, but it's been a very interesting ride. I've met a lot of fascinating people, had some interesting discussions, and I learned a lot, not just about the Great Pyramid, but just about how people think, because a lot of people will just find an author that they like or Egyptology and then just believe what they say. But a lot of people have an inquisitive mind, and then even if they're told something by Egyptologists, they don't necessarily believe it. And those are the people that seem to be drawn to this direction of research. And even no matter what the Great Pyramid was for, even if you think it was a tomb or for religion or whatever, it still had to be assembled. So its purpose and how it was assembled are actually separate. So a lot of people are drawn by understanding how the stones were set in place, and then come to the kind of a deeper direction of our research, how this complex water pump operated. So it's been fun. I mean, and in debates, I'm able to hold my own to not to brag on myself. And there's a lot wrong with Egyptology, and there are alternative ideas out there that people can examine.
Of course, Stephen, there is the astronomy at these ancients, and not to focus on the Orion correlation, we'll come back to that in a moment, but the pyramid is an 8-sided pyramid, the Great Pyramid. We can see that on the equinox. Is this to make the building look aesthetically pleasing?
I think that it was built to make the sides of the Great Pyramid stronger, because during construction, there was water inside the Great Pyramid, and the hydrostatic force pushed on the walls. So if they bent in, sort of similar to a hydroelectric dam,
concave, yeah,
then it would put those stones in compression, if you will, and it helped for strength. That's why they made the Great Pyramid so much more complex by having 8 sides, but that it improved the strength of the sides of the Great Pyramid. That's my thought.
You know, the Egyptologists, I'm sure I don't have to tell you this, but Steve, for the purpose of the listeners, they believe that it's an accidentally, each side of the Great Pyramid accidentally broke its back and bent inwards independently 4 times. That's what the Egyptologists say about it.
Oh yeah, they just declare edicts and just say just pull stuff out of the top of their hat. And my understanding is the largest stone moved by Egyptology was the one in an Egyptologist's kidney.
I like that, Steve. That's hilarious. I like that, brother. I like that.
Do you know what the difference between an Egyptologist and a tomb robber is?
What's that, Steve?
The difference is an Egyptologist has a college education and a tomb robber don't.
Wow, I like that one. You know, and they say, like, you know, they say the pioneers are the ones with the arrows in the back, and I definitely think that the Egyptologists are the ones firing the arrows. You know, I don't mind doing that. I don't like to speak of all archaeology like that, because I think in other archaeological fields there's a lot more courageous people coming out, but there's just something about Egyptology. In a way, I think they set the tone too early. In other words, they put too much at stake and they got it wrong very early on. And they're living with this 100-year-old, 200-year-old saga, and they can't get rid of it. They
Yes. Yeah. It's strange. Yeah, to become an Egyptologist, you sit in a classroom and you're told stuff by the professor who's an Egyptologist. And then you graduate, and then there you are. Then you're an Egyptologist. I mean, it's like a priesthood, if you will. It's almost like a mystery religion.
And they don't ever teach the engineering, the mathematics, the astronomy, or any of the stuff that the ancient Egyptians did. They don't teach any of this as part of the course to be an Egyptologist.
No, they don't teach it. All they teach is whatever they already believe, and then the next generation believes it. It's more of a religion than a science.
But they also then, when they do get the PhD doctorates, they seem to dabble in these theories without any background or relevance in skill set. They just come up with theories, and like you say, these edicts to dispel their philosophy, which is, you know, it's okay. It is their own philosophy, but it doesn't make it true. But they seem to just then dabble in the engineering or dabble with these ridiculous notions of how they did all this stuff, only just to quench the opinions of others.
Yes, they essentially offer a hypothesis, but then they present the hypothesis as a fact, and that's disingenuous, very disingenuous. You know, no other science or endeavor or study can get away with that. Mm-hmm. You just can't do that. Like there were people that say, well, there's cold fusion. You know, those 2 scientists, I can't think of their names. Well, we got cold fusion. Well, the whole world says, okay, just show us. But then Egyptologists say, oh, the casing stones were cut with precision with hand tools, and everyone bows down to them and agrees with them. You know, it's strange.
So, Stephen, tell me about the time frame of the Great Pyramid. Do you challenge the exact time frame of when this was built? Is that a problem that comes up for you?
You mean how long it was built? How long it took to build it?
Yeah.
Okay, how long it took to build it, if it was built by Egyptologists, the amount of time it would take would be infinity, because they can't even make a single casing stone. But in the Erie Canal, again, for an example, the canal was 4.5 feet deep, and it moved the weight of the Great Pyramid, that much cargo, higher than the Great Pyramid in 2 years. So I think that it was built very quickly, probably 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And remember, water locks can operate 24 hours a day. So they would do most of the precision work, certainly during the daytime, but the vast majority could still be done at nighttime. So I think it was much quicker than what Egyptologists say. They can't even get one casing stone right. So, but when it was built, that's another question. I don't address when it was built. So it could have been a lot older than Egyptologists say. Many people are now accepting that thought, just like the Sphinx is now considered to be a lot older than Egyptologists say based on water erosion. So
this
it's hard to say when it was built.
This could have been a 24-hour process then, with the locks maybe working at nighttime, filling up again, and then crews working during the day. This was a 24-hour process.
Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. It's a construction project. Mm-hmm. The Great Pyramid is a pile of rocks. The Great Pyramid is a construction project. And real people in the real world really did move those stones. And they did it on a production line basis. They did it in an efficient manner. They didn't it doesn't matter how much you sweat, you can't do it by dragging the stones. And one evidence to support that statement is that Egyptology can't do what they say it was done or how it was done. It can't be done. So that's why there's so many alternative ideas, is because Egyptology doesn't use the scientific method. The scientific method removes controversy. There's not much controversy about which stone is harder, soapstone or a diamond. And the reason why there's no controversy about that is because people use the scientific method and scratch the two stones together and see which one is harder. But Egyptology doesn't reduce controversy because they will not engage in the scientific method. Isn't that odd?
Odd. It is bizarre, and that's why I like to just talk about that. And for what it is, it's a necessary component. Perhaps, and like we do in our own renewable energy power plants today, for example, like dams that you talk about, they pump the water up at night time and then they drain the dams during the day. Because they have to power, they have wasted electricity at night time that people aren't using, so they use them to pump the dams and refill them and restock them while they're waiting on the rain to fall. So those dams are in a 24-hour process. Perhaps this was the cycle of the pump of the pyramid as well, naturally fulfilling itself back up at night time, waiting for daytime use.
That could be. What you're describing is done here in the United States in the largest dam in the northern hemisphere. It's the Grand Coulee Dam on the Columbia River. And that dam, the largest structure in North America and the most expensive when built, pumps water up to a huge reservoir. So the largest structure in North America, built by a big river, is a water pump. And I think in a very similar way, the largest structure built in ancient Egypt was also built to be a water pump. So the parallels are very fascinating in terms of technology. And like I say, the interest has been very high. It's a refreshing alternative to the ideas that Egyptologists have offered to explain the Great Pyramid.
Mm-hmm. Well, I for sure it's definitely refreshing compared to Egyptology. I think anything is. If I said that the cows built the pyramid, it would be more refreshing, Stephen. And that's not to take away from your work in any way. I just want to be foolish for a moment.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, this is refreshing, Stephen. What we're describing, Stephen, is basically a hydraulic civilization, a civilization that really understood hydraulics and the power of hydraulics.
That is correct. And most people that are not technically inclined say, well, they had a bunch of water in the river. Why do they need a water pump? Well, the water in the river doesn't help at all. You need the water up on the crops. Well, what about the yearly inundation? Well, yeah, one flood in a hot desert isn't going to irrigate crops year round. But when they had this water pump that could function, then that turned the desert into a garden. Mm-hmm. All farmers that have land next to a river have a pump the water out. So, it's just,
On my second time to Egypt, I actually had visited a little island on the Nile, and then just a little bit of the coast of the Nile as well. And there was farms there growing banana trees, and people have no idea the power that is, because the banana trees were producing so much fruit that the banana tree could never even stand upright ever. It was just they were pumping obviously with an electrical pump, but they were pumping that Nile. They can't even drain that Nile. It's that big. But they were pumping that Nile 24/7, turning anywhere that's on the edge of the Nile into most lush producing gardens. And the banana trees, there was just bunches of bananas dragging that tree to the ground. There was so much of them.
Oh, that's a great story. Now, you mentioned that it was pumped with an electric pump, but the wires on that electric pump ultimately ended up at the High Aswan Dam. They built this big dam, the largest structure in Africa, I believe. And that dam is part of a water pumping system. Much of the electricity is used for irrigation. And people in the modern world built this large structure, the Aswan Dam, to essentially be a water pump. Well, in ancient times, people built their large structure, the Great Pyramid, and built it to be a water pump. Certainly, they operate in different ways, but they still serve the same purpose.
We're not much different really to the ancients. Maybe we just go about it a different way. Maybe we could detach totally from the electrical grid and use these natural pumps. I mean, to be honest, most of what we use for electricity today just gets converted into something else anyway, whether it's mechanical power or heat or something else.
That is correct. Into light, into running our computers and everything else. And a lot of that electricity where you're at, as well as here in the Pacific Northwest of the United States, a lot of that is produced by water that has been elevated by using hydroelectric dams. The dam raises the water up high, and then that water is moved down through a generator and creates electricity. And the Great Pyramid water pump raises the water high, and then it was allowed to move down to produce whatever they wanted, either electricity or any other technical purposes.
Sure. Stephen, we're at the top of the hour. Please tell people your websites one more time, where they can get your books and where they can get involved in this research, because I know you have a very interactive social network going on too.
Great. Yeah, if people want more information, they can visit our website at www.thepump.org, and they can find out about our mission statement, how we're funded. We have a video series about how the Great Pyramid was assembled that people can watch. There's some podcasts for people that are interested in that. And our goals, some frequently asked questions. And they can like us on Facebook. And also they can contact us by email if they want to. info@thepump.org. We have a dedicated phone line, which is 541-824-0032. They can call us 24 hours a day. And again, we're located out here in southwestern Oregon in the United States. So they can find out what we're about. They can ask us a question. They can also become involved in one way or another. So I hope people do that and join in what we're doing.
Wow. And today's author has been Steve Myers. We have been talking about the how and the why of ancient Egypt. That's the lost technologies of the Great Pyramid, how the Great Pyramid was built. And we were talking also about the Great Pyramid prosperity machine, why the Great Pyramid was built. Stephen, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. As an engineer, I love what you do because it's an open philosophy. It's a very rational philosophy, and it's a very satisfying philosophy that we're getting into here, and it's a wonderful alternative to the Egyptologist stranglehold that they have. But not to bash Egyptology too much, but I'm sorry, the gloves are off at this stage. These guys have had it too long, Stephen. But I really thank you for your time today, Stephen. It's really been great.
Well, thank you very much. You're a tremendous host, and I hope I can be on your show again.